When we think of empires falling, we usually picture these huge, epic battles, right? Barbarian hordes at the gates, all that stuff. But history tells a much quieter story. A lot of the time, the fatal wound isn't dealt on the battlefield at all. It's on the balance sheet. Empires die when their money dies. And believe me, it's a story that has played out before, and its lessons are frankly more relevant today than ever. So that leads to a pretty unsettling question, doesn't it? Could the US dollar, the absolute bedrock of the global financial system for almost a century, just fail? I mean, it sounds crazy, almost unthinkable. But this is not just some abstract thought experiment. It's not an experiment because it has happened before. The fall of the Roman denarius, which was basically the US dollar of its day, gives us a direct, step-by-step pattern. And if you're studying economics or history, this is one of those patterns you absolutely need to understand. It's the blueprint for how a currency empire can completely unravel. Okay, so first things first, how does a currency even get to that dominant empire-like status to begin with? It's definitely not as simple as just firing up the printing presses. It's really about building this massive global system of trust, a system that rests on three very distinct pillars. So this is the key formula, broken down into those three pillars. Pillar 1, you have to have military might. You need it to secure trade routes and project power. Think Rome's famous legions, or today, US aircraft carrier groups. Pillar 2, your currency has to be at the very center of global trade. For Rome, all roads led to the Mediterranean. For the US, it's all about the huge dollar-based markets for things like oil. But it's that third pillar, institutional trust, that's both the most critical and, as we'll see, the most fragile. Let's look at the golden age for both of them. Back in the time of Emperor Augustus, the Roman denarius was about 95% pure silver. It was a reliable, trusted standard all across the known world. Now fast forward. After World War II, under what was called the Bretton Woods system, the US dollar was backed by gold at a fixed rate. See the pattern? Both empires built their economic power on a foundation of sound, reliable money that had real, tangible value. But here's the irony. The very success of an empire creates the seeds of its own destruction. See? The costs of staying on top, the armies, the infrastructure, the social programs, they eventually become overwhelming. And that's when leaders are faced with a fatal temptation, the choice to cheat their own currency. And this brings us to a really crucial term. This is one you'll want to remember: debasement. To put it simply, it's when the government officially starts reducing the precious metal in a coin, say by mixing in cheaper metals like copper, but then legally forces everyone to accept it as if nothing has changed. It is the ancient world's version of printing money out of thin air. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about greedy emperors trying to get rich. Debasement was a desperate solution to some really deep structural problems. As you can see here, the Roman state had these massive, politically untouchable costs: a huge military that was always demanding bonuses, a sprawling government bureaucracy, and social programs like the free grain for the people of Rome. When taxes couldn't cover it all, debasement became the tool they used to fill the gap. And this timeline, wow, this is basically a financial horror story told over centuries. It wasn't a sudden crash, it was this slow generational poisoning of the money supply. Just look at how it progresses. It starts small with Nero, a little clip here and there, but then look at Septimius Severus, a massive drop just to fund the military. By the time you get to the crisis of the 3rd century, the denarius is essentially a worthless bronze disc with a thin silver wash. The trust is just gone. And the modern parallel to this is just chillingly direct. In 1971, the US officially severed the dollar's last tie to gold. This decision, often called the Nixon shock, removed that physical anchor on the money supply. It was the modern equivalent of an emperor deciding to start mixing more bronze into his silver coins. Suddenly, there was no hard limit on how much money could be created. And the result is what you're seeing right here. The M2 money supply, which is basically all the cash and easy-to-access money just sloshing around in the economy, it absolutely exploded. This chart shows a staggering 160% increase in just 14 years. This isn't just policy, this is debt monetization on a Roman scale. It's creating new money to fund deficits that taxes just can't cover anymore. So, what happens when that final pillar of institutional trust finally crumbles? What are the actual real-world consequences when people, both at home and around the world, realize their money is being systematically devalued? Well, the results are nothing short of catastrophic. Just take a look at this number. By the year 265 AD, prices across the entire Roman Empire had surged by 1/1000%. 1,000%. This isn't just regular inflation. This is hyperinflation. It's the complete and total demolition of value, and it wipes out savings and paralyzes the entire economy. The economy just grinds to a halt. Long-distance trade, which was the lifeblood of the empire, becomes impossibly risky. People start hoarding any of the old, good silver coins they can find. That's a classic example of what's called Gresham's Law, where bad money drives out good. Commerce starts to revert back to primitive bartering, and citizens literally flee the chaotic cities for the countryside, planting the seeds for what would become medieval feudalism. And, of course, the state never blames itself. In 301 AD, the Emperor Diocletian issued his famous Edict on Maximum Prices, a piece of which you see here. It set rigid price ceilings on everything from wheat to wages, and the penalty for breaking the law was death. He blamed the whole crisis on greedy merchants and speculators, not on centuries of his own government's debasement. And the result? You guessed it, widespread shortages and a massive black market. This quote really gets to the core injustice of it all. Inflation is a stealth tax. It allows the state to pay off its enormous debts with money that's worth less and less. The government, which is the biggest debtor of all, actually benefits. But anyone who did the responsible thing, the prudent citizen who saved their money, they watch their life's work and their future just evaporate into thin air. Which brings us right back to our central question. We've seen the Roman blueprint for how a currency collapses. Unpayable debts lead to monetary debasement, which is followed by inflation, economic chaos, and a whole lot of political blame shifting. So, how closely does our modern world actually mirror this ancient pattern? All right, let's put it all side by side, because when you do, the parallels are pretty chilling. Look at the first row, the fiscal problem. Rome had huge unfunded military and social spending. The US is facing a soaring debt to GDP ratio and trillion-dollar deficits. Now, the monetary solution. Rome debased its coins until they were basically worthless. The US monetizes its debt through a massive expansion of the money supply. And finally, the consequences. Rome got hyperinflation and a collapse in trade. Today, we're seeing stubborn inflation and, really critically, a slow but steady erosion of the dollar's status as the world's main reserve currency, dropping from 71% down to 58% of global reserves. The trend lines are, well, they're unmistakable. So, the pattern of history is laid out right in front of us with terrifying clarity. It teaches us that a nation's greatest threat often isn't some external enemy, but its own internal fiscal decay. The real question isn't whether this can happen again. The question is whether we've learned anything at all from the past. Are we actually capable of writing a different ending to this very old story, or are we just turning the page to the next chapter?